So hi everybody, I'm Anastasia. I am the policy manager at Worksafe, and I am here to give you all overview training on SB 553, the Workplace Violence and Prevention Law. So yes, I did things a little bit out of order. Sorry, I am Anastasia, policy manager at Worksafe. My email is there. If anybody wants to email me any questions or anything afterwards, feel free to shoot me an email. So, WorkSafe, a little bit about us. So, WorkSafe is a California based organization. We represent, or not represent, but we support policy advocacy throughout all of California. But we're based in Oakland. And our mission statement is preventing worker illness, injury, and death by bringing justice to the workplace. And those are not a lot of words, but wordy. And I think the better way to say it is we like to be sure people come home from work the same way they went to work, and that is alive and unharmed. So if you went to work uninjured, you come back from work uninjured. You went to work alive, you should be coming home at the end of the day. And so we achieve this by employing four main strategic objectives. One is increasing worker power, supporting more protective laws for workers, ensuring just treatment of injured workers, and elevating occupational safety and health in the public discourse. This latter has become easier since COVID. I think OSH issues have been thrown more into the spotlight. Before COVID, it was a different world, is my understanding. But keeping OSH issues in the public discourse has become a lot easier since, unfortunately, the pandemic happened. And another way, or rather, how we implement these strategies we try to employ is through policy advocacy, being a legal support service center, worker and advocate training like this, coalition building, and public outreach. Then on the next slide, we have our agenda for today and what we'll be covering. So again, there'll be an overview of workplace violence, protections and remedies under OSH and existing laws, and then discourse about Senate Bill 553, which just passed, um, uh, and how what new protections that law has for everybody. So on the next slide, we have some of the general rights and protections that workers have in a workplace. So generally speaking, workers have three buckets of occupational safety and health rights. And that's the right to know, the right to protection, and the right to take action. The right to know is the right to have access to information about health and safety issues in your workplace. And this includes the right to know what kind of workplace violence um, issues or situations, scenarios that workers are at risk for, what violence has occurred in the past, and what the employer is doing to prevent that in the future from occurring. So, like the workplace violence prevention plan. The right to protect covers workers' rights to have a healthy and safe work environment, and employers' requirement to protect workers from any workplace hazards that they might include or that they might encounter, which includes workplace violence as a hazard. The right to take action. This would include activities to improve health and safety conditions in the workplace, such as filing a Cal OSHA complaint, and filing a labor commissioner's office complaint if you're retaliated against for implementing one of your rights or taking action on one of these rights. On the next slide, we cover some job protected leave options. Won't get too much into this. We're not a leave organization. We aren't experts on leave. The takeaway is just that when somebody has suffered from workplace violence, there are some laws that already exist that ensure job protected leave for victims of crime is something that they can take and not be retaliated against when they need. Again, not experts in this field, but just on the slide, and you guys will get these slides later on as well. There are leave options available for people. So, workplace violence, the big picture. So, the definition of workplace violence is that workplace violence consists of an unlawful violence or a credible threat of violence at the workplace. Unlawful violence is defined as including any kind of physical attack on another person, whether successful or not. Stalking is also considered violence. Defending yourself or someone else from an attack does not count as violence. A credible threat of violence is anything that can be seen as an attempt to make someone fear for their safety or for that of their family safety. And then on the next slide, we have some examples of violence at work. And a lot of these we can all probably conceptualize, unfortunately. We all probably understand on some level what violence looks like. And so, again, we have these examples on there. I won't necessarily read through any of them, but employees being harassed by another employee, employees being harassed by a non employee member, and employees being harassed by management people at the workplace are kind of the common three buckets of where the violence tends to stem from. And then on the next slide, we talk about how since the pandemic, workplace violence has increased. I also think politics, the current political zeitgeist of the country for the last 8 years and probably for the next 4 years, will is one that's been very tense, and people feel very much entitled to enter people's personal spaces. People, especially who work in the public service industry, there seems to be this uptick of the disrespect, to put it lightly, that they seem to have to deal with from the general public, and everybody just seems to be very much on edge. But this isn't about my opining. Tell you some stats. So, since the pandemic, U.S. healthcare workers have experienced a 250% increase of injury and illness. You have nurses have a 44% increase of nurses reporting that they've experienced physical violence, and 68% increase reporting that they've experienced verbal violence. This is from 2020, right? We don't have current data, but the studies have indicated, not studies, but articles that I've read on have indicated that that trend is still the same. It may have gone down since 2020, but it's still an increase since 2020 in the violence that people are experiencing in the workplace. On the next slide, these are examples that are all too real about how workers don't feel safe at work. And so we have one in seven employees doesn't feel safe at work. I think Worksafe has about 7 employees, and so it's not a big number. If one of us, doesn't feel safe at work, right? You amplify that at a bigger facility with more people. One in every 7 people you see don't feel safe in their workplace. On the next slide, we talk about how workplace violence is the second biggest cause of death in the workplace. There are about 400 homicides that occur in the workplace every year. And I want to note that while we work to inform you all about the full scope of workplace violence, we have to acknowledge that the quality of statistics on this matter are not systemically collected or updated. And so there's a major underreporting of incidents. So we have 400 incidents. That doesn't mean that there's not more. Workplaces don't want their place of employment to be listed as, somebody died here. This was a workplace violence incident. And so we're sure there's a lot of politicking that goes into how deaths and incidents are actually categorized, and if they're categorized as an actual workplace violence or a workplace homicide. On the next slide, we have the National Safety Council and about a report that they've released. So each year, the National Safety Council releases a report revealing the number of injuries and days lost due to workplace assaults. And we can see on this, sorry, I'm like trying to open it while I also read my notes, but you guys have it in front of you, the report. And so this data is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and this can help us identify trends in workplace violence. Keeping in mind that some of these changes may be due to increased reporting and can also be underreported as well, but we can see you have the types of violence and whether they're going up and down, right? Shooting, stabbing, or cutting versus assault, hitting and kicking, strangling people, multiple violent acts by one person. The numbers aren't small, they aren't low, right? And that all this is happening at work, is really disheartening, to say the least. On the next slide, we have the annual average of 1.3 million non-fatal workplace violent victims that have occurred throughout the last 5 years, 5 years ending in 2019. There were 8 non-fatal crimes per 1,000 workers, and this included sexual assault, robbery, aggravated assault, simple assault. We have persons in corrections occupations who have the highest average rate of non-fatal workplace violence. There was 149.1 per 1,000 employers. Sorry, employees, workers. So men typically are the group of individuals who are committing a majority of the non-fatal workplace violence. 64% of non-fatal workplace violence is being caused by men. Another 47% of incidents is being caused by strangers. And male victims are less likely than female victims to know their offender when they're harmed at work. In about 78% of non fatal workplace cases, the offender was unarmed and the victim still sustained an injury. And about 15% of victims of non fatal workplace violence reported having severe emotional distress due to the crime afterwards. And so, I mean, not that, I mean, you guys are here at this training, so you probably don't need to be told, right? But like workplace violence is real. It's serious. And again, my people are, I'm sure we all love our jobs, but we go to work to make ends meet. We go to work to provide for ourselves, to our families, to have housing, have medical care. And the fact that people have to deal with this violence at all, right? But violence at your workplace, where you're also oftentimes like so restricted and confined and you're being watched and worried about what you do and how that might impact your employment. There's just so many other factors that you're considering when you're at work in general. And then to also have to be dealing with violence therein. And then if it's another coworker, if it's management, it's just such an awful situation for people to be in. On the next slide, we have some more stats. I'm going to kind of skim through the stuff to some of the next slides. We're going to share the slides with you all, so I know you guys can go through it. And I do want to be sure we have time for questions, as well as getting to the meat of SB 53. But the next few slides discuss how workplace violence disproportionately affects women, unfortunately. I don't think that's news to any of us, though. And so from 2019, we have data that shows that for 2017, homicides were 20% fatal, homicides were 20% of all fatal workplace injuries for women, but only 7% for men. In 2020, women made up about 8.1% of all workplace fatalities, but represented 6.3% of workplace homicides. 30,000 sexual assaults at the workplace are reported by women annually, and countless more just when it comes to sexual assault in general. The statistics say that the statistics are underreported. So they don't represent all of the sexual assaults that are happening. 6% of workplace violence incidents stem from a problem with the personal relationship or from domestic violence when it comes to women. Deviant intimate partner violence often spills into the workplace, unfortunately. When you think about it, I mean, you're at home more than you're at work usually, right? So it's called domestic violence, but it's domestic at its core. This person is a domestic partner in some capacity, but it spills over all aspects of your life, including work. Many abusive partners, they actually target their victims at the workplace because it's an easy way to find them. The other person, the victim, is restrained oftentimes in how they feel they can actually respond to the violence. They harass them, they stalk them at work. It's all a way of exerting either further or even further control of their victim and making their victim feel like this person controls every aspect of their life. Working at home, of course, doesn't seem to be a solution. In fact, it's reported that it's been making things worse. 23% of women who've experienced sexual assault have said that things have gotten worse since the pandemic in working from home. The next slide breaks down further how women in restaurants have been harassed during their work. 58% of hotel housekeepers have experienced sexual abuse, 80% of farm workers. And these numbers are still focusing on women and how they're disproportionately impacted. Low workers, on the next slide, are more vulnerable to workplace violence because in America, poverty makes everything worse. So we can see here that low wage workers are particularly vulnerable to workplace violence. Workers in low wage industries are exceptionally vulnerable to experiencing sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, trafficking. Their workplaces are often retail places, but then hotels, restaurant, hospitals, clinics, private residences, farms, which all these places sometimes are able to be more isolated or have more isolated areas where people can be abused, and this makes them more vulnerable to perpetrators. Many of these workers also spend large amount of times working in isolation, which increases their chance of being threatened, stalked, or assaulted on the job. Stalking, often overlooked. Um, just in general, our laws in America are very much once you've been harmed, we can help you. And so stalking is this kind of, it's not perceived, or the law and society struggles to perceive it as a harm in and of itself. And there's nothing that has been done. And there's, it's like you have the mens rea, but you don't have the actual physical act of committing a crime, and you need both of them, right? And so it's often overlooked, and it's a crime that particularly women suffer from disproportionately. So it's important to keep in mind that many incidents of workplace violence escalate from stalking. So people have a stalker, and then finally that stalker becomes a physical perpetrator of violence in some way. So being aware of this ensures that we're able to try to engage in workplace violence preventative measures to help the stalking not escalate. So now we have SB 553 on the next slide. What is it? Oh, yo, Celine, you good with the slides. I was coming to be sure I wasn't talking too fast, but you were right on. What is SB 553? Hopefully I know for you guys today, and I have a good answer. You guys can ask questions at the end. If there's something I do not know, it is a relatively new law. I will definitely get back to you all. So SB 553, Senate Bill 553, known as the Workplace Violence Prevention Bill, was recently signed into law in California, and it requires employers to take proactive steps to prevent workplace violence against workers. The law was designed to improve workplace safety, protect employees, and enhance workplace violence mechanisms, or workplace violence reporting mechanisms. In the legal context, this law directly impacts employers' obligation to create a safe working environment and provide protections for workers. And how we might look at it, it means that they're legally responsible to do these things. And when they don't do it, there are repercussions for employers when they do not do it. And this is important because as advocates, we play a crucial role in ensuring that the law is not that the law is enforced, but that when the law is not enforced, that there are remedial actions that workers can take to correct the fact that that law was not properly enforced. And so in the next slide, we have again the definition of workplace violence. Again, it's unlawful violence and a credible threat of violence. Unlawful violence, physical attack on another person. Doesn't matter if it's successful or not, much like, battery versus assault. It doesn't matter if you actually hit them, you tried to hit them, that's violence. Stalking is considered violence, and defending yourself against an attack, self-defense, is not violence. A credible threat of violence is anything that makes you fear for yourself, but also for the safety of your family. So on the next slide, we have the key objectives of SB 553. So how does SB 553 work to protect workers from workplace violence? It requires an employer to establish and maintain a workplace violence prevention plan. It seems simple, but it's big because before, we used to have to try to rely on the general IIPP. But now it's clearly stated that employers just have to have a plan to explicitly deal with workplace violence. They also have to record information about workplace violence incidents, train employees on workplace violence prevention tactics, and create and maintain records of workplace violence hazards. And they must include the workplace violence prevention plan as a part of their injury prevention plan, their illness and injury prevention plan. On the next slide, we have some additional key objectives of 553. And this is the TRO, the Temporary Restraining Order for Workers. So this is another very important key provision of SB 553. And it helps protect workers by allowing legal action of a civil legal action of a temporary restraining order to be taken out for workers to protect them for workplace violence. And so how I understand it, SB 553, this aspect of it, revised the California Workplace Violence State Act. And before employers could take out these restraining orders on behalf of workers in the environment or workers at their workplace, but now unions or union representatives, or just rather representatives in general, can take out these temporary restraining orders on behalf of an employee facing violence and threats at the workplace. Another thing is that if a company has multiple work sites, it's possible to get that restraining order to apply to multiple work sites when the situation allows. Also, if the employee doesn't want to be named in the TRO, they can they can decline to be a part of the restraining order, essentially. But even if one worker opts out, the representative can still act to protect the other workers in the workplace from workplace violence by getting this restraining order. On the next slide, we have who is covered. I put umbrellas there in case you're wondering why there's umbrellas. I was like, oh, coverage, umbrella, like the umbrella covers you. So just had to explain why that's there, because when I look at it, it's like, why are there umbrellas on my workplace violence slide? But that's why. Who is covered? All employers in California must comply with this new law, except it's always that except certain employers. So some of the exempted workplaces are healthcare facilities and operations. But this is because the healthcare facilities already have their own workplace violence plan. So they're exempted from this one because they already have another specific one that they got for their specific industry before we got this one for general industry. Any other employer that's been complying with the healthcare regulation is also exempted. Facilities that are operated by CDCR or the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, law enforcement agencies, and employers with fewer than 10 employees that are not open to the public. And also teleworking employees who are working from home or working from locations that are not controlled by the employer are also exempt from this. On the next slide, we go into some more key provisions of the law. And this just kind of is breaking down what the workplace violence plan is supposed to contain, or how it's supposed to be offered. So here we see that employers are required to develop and implement a written workplace violence prevention plan. So in the law, if this is something you're interested in, right, this applies to the work you do, it will explicitly lay out like what that workplace violence plan needs to entail, though, in more depth. So it's not here on the slides, but there is more details about that if you're interested. Same thing for employee trainings. Trainings are mandatory for employees, and the trainings have to be on very specific topics. For instance, recognizing and avoiding and responding to workplace and workplace violence incidents. But again, in the law, you definitely get more nitty gritty of what the training is supposed to entail, how often it's supposed to be. So if this is something that applies to you and your work, I would definitely pull up the law, type in SB 553, and it'll pop up. On the next slide, we go into some more about how employers are supposed to conduct risk assessments of the workplace, the details of their reporting and record keeping, the rules around how that record keeping must be maintained and how long it's supposed to be maintained for, and also how they must handle complaints relate to workplace violence. On the next slide, we have the employer's responsibility under SB 553, which we've kind of already touched on. But essentially, they have to develop these workplace prevention plans for their specific workplace risk, which is important, right? It can't just be a generic plan. It needs to be based off the risk present in your workplace. They need to be conducting annual risk assessments to adjust these policies. So last year, you had a workplace prevention plan, but after that plan went into effect, this new type of violence occurred 10 times in the following year. So now when you remake that plan, remake that training, it needs to be accounting for this new instance of violence that you've seen come about in your workplace. ensuring that the reporting systems are in place and that workers feel comfortable and know about how to file complaints. And for us, failure to comply with these requirements can lead to legal consequences for employers, including fines, penalties, and our favorite, litigation. On the next slide, we just talk a little bit more about enforcement and penalties. So there are penalties that are written into the law for people who violate this. In particular, CalOSHA. CalOSHA is the organization that is tasked with enforcing and issuing the penalties for violators. And so CalOSHA, if there is a violation, you can file a CalOSHA complaint, and then CalOSHA is supposed to conduct an inspection of workplaces, of that workplace, to ensure that the workplace violence law is being implemented in a way to alleviate whatever issue or whatever risk you've raised in your complaint. And that's what CalOSHA is going to do. And so if employers are made aware of hazards and they don't address them, or they fail to report certain workplace violence incidents, they can also be cited for those inactions as well. So also on the next slide, the labor commissioner. Now you can't file your initial CalOSHA or your initial complaint for a health and safety violation. You can file that with the labor commissioner, but if you file a health and safety complaint and then your employer retaliates against you, you can file your retaliation complaint with the labor commissioner's office. And I'm at the end of my slide. I didn't even have to skip those slides that I skipped because we're done. Do we have any questions from anybody?
It looks like we have a question in the Q&A. They said, what does it mean that there was an increase of 249% in 2020? Is that in 1 year or is it measured from a specific time?
Are you talking about a slide where I stated a percentage? And do you recall what slide it was? I'll try to go back and see where I said 249.
They said it was in the first couple slides.
Healthcare workers were the most affected. U.S. healthcare workers experienced a 249% increase in injury and illness in 2020. And so the question is, how does it mean that there's a 249% increase in that 1 year? Yeah, it seems that it was an increase in that 1 year of 249%. From what year they're measuring it against, I don't have that information off the top of my head. I'm sorry, but I can look into it. But I would assume the previous year, but I do not know for certain. What are some good ways? You're welcome. Hi, Amelia. Oh my God, can I tell you guys? I don't know if you guys know Amelia, but me and Amelia went to law school together, and I hired her. She was selected to be in our workers' rights clinic. So I love when I see Amelia doing workers' rights. um, what are some good ways to assess risk in the workplace other than just observing? Is there something other than waiting and seeing? And so, as far as an employee, how an employee should assess risk in the workplace. I mean, that's not their job. They shouldn't have to assess those risks. I would say if they're at work and they do assess the risk, to tell their employer and to do it, tell them orally, but also send some kind of line of written communication, whether it's a text or an email, and tell them that I've noticed that at night both doors, like a lot of stores, they close one door now, like one of the automatic doors and the other one stays open. I've noticed that both of the doors being open has led to a lot of young kids coming in, and stealing a lot of items and interacting with the staff aggressively when they're doing it. Can we please consider closing one of the doors, right? Like just having one door open and making sure we have a security guard there, right? Just communicating to their employer that they've identified a risk and that they want this risk to be addressed, and doing it, of course, as we know, right, in writing, because then if the employer fails to address that, you can take that up with the CalOSHA complaint or another form of litigation if applicable. Does that answer your question? Well, you're anonymous, but if you want to type in there, if I answered your question, if not, feel free to run it back again and I will try to address it better. Amelia, have you seen Kalosha actually investigating reports of workplace violence? So, and I think and this is being recorded, so I tried to I feel like I got a little stuck when I was talking about that. Um and how much should I say? Because I normally, as Amelia can tell you, say way too much. Um Cal OSHA has having a serious enforcement crisis. They do not have enough investigators, inspectors to do the amount of enforcement that California workers require to be safe, in official opinion. And I know during COVID, while COVID was raging in particular, what Kalosha would do for a lot of complaints is they would send a letter investigation. And so this is when I file a complaint. I say my employer is not doing something and my health and safety is in jeopardy. Kalosha says, great, we'll send them a letter telling them that we've been told something is wrong and telling them they have to show us that these things are not wrong or that they fix these things. Then the employer takes whatever temporary pictures they need to take or whatever they need they need to submit to Kalosha to make Kalosha think that the issue is addressed. They do that, and there's no follow up. Nobody is doing an impromptu inspection to really see how that workplace is running on a day to day basis when they're not trying to present their best foot forward. And so, yes, they're investigating it, but often through letter inspections at most, and not doing all the on site inspections that they really need to be doing to really be sure. So, yeah, they're investigating them, but the investigative efforts are heavily thwarted by their understaffing. And Worksafe has been trying to do a lot of work around figuring out how to get Kalosha staffed better. They have the positions have funding, but the positions aren't filled. And so that is the peril, the conundrum we're in with Kalosha, which is why if I don't not a litigator in that sense, but if there are other ways to enforce these laws in these workplaces in a more civil sense outside of an agency, that's probably a good option right now for people. Let me know if I answered your question, Amelia. You're welcome. Um, the training is really great. Oh my God, thank you. Has there been a similar training for the injury illness prevention program? I don't know. Probably. I've been here since 2021. And so since I've been here, we've got quite a few new laws that where we try to use the IIPP, we don't have to anymore because now these particular issues like heat, violence have their own law in place. So I'm positive we've done an injury and illness prevention plan, prevention program training. I haven't done it, but I'm sure we have one. And if you're interested, you can send me an email and I will tell my boss that you guys want a training on the IPP. If we don't have one, we'll make one. But I'm pretty sure we have one. I just can't say definitively if there has been that training, but I'm sure there has. Any other questions from people? Okay, well, my email is not on this slide where I say you can find me at. Sorry about that. But if you have any other questions that come up, if you want an IPP training, feel free to send me an email. It's on the first slide, and you guys can email me. And we will definitely assist if we can. And if not, we'll try to point you into the direction of somebody who can.